So our final presenter today is Karen Corrigan, who is an independent agronomist and co-owner of McGillicuddy Corrigan Agronomics, and she's an agronomic consultant to farmers in the upper Midwest. She's a certified crop advisor and holds a master's degree in agronomy-weed science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Karen also serves as an adjunct instructor at Carl Sandburg College and Heartland Community College, teaching classes on agronomy, soils, horticulture, and pesticide application. Are you sure that's all? Are we going to add to that, Karen?
Don't call Miranda.
All right, so please join me in welcoming Karen.
All right. Can you guys hear me back there? Pitchstick, are you listening? Yeah, he's not listening. Is it working? Okay. Okay, thanks, Chad. All right, first of all, as a part of Heartland's faculty, thank you so much for that donation that you guys made. It's a great investment in our students and hopefully students that will stay in this area and provide you guys support in your farming operations after that. So we really appreciate that. To answer your question, the McLean County Farm Bureau lab shop area, it won't be a traditional ag mech, but they do hope to pull in some of the battery technology and the Rivian technology and also the robotics classes to kind of bring that mechanical aspect into the agriculture program. So if you guys have any questions about that, I know a little bit. I'm just an adjunct, but I do know some. But we'll go ahead and talk about maximizing your weed control success. If you think I have the answer and the silver bullets, you should know that silver bullets only kill vampires, and you should tamper your expectations down. So I know it gets hard out in the field sometimes based on the questions that I get during the season. And in 2022, I had more questions about rope wicks than I've had in 25 years. And also about tough herbicide, which I haven't really seen since the chemical shed in grad school a couple decades ago. So I know some people are having issues. How many of you guys have neighbors who have weed control issues? Yeah, okay. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the things we have in our toolbox and how we can better utilize them. You know, we've been hearing for a long time there aren't any new chemistries on the right horizon, and so we kind of have to deal with what we have. And so we're going to talk about how we can maximize the tools that we already have and get those details correct, because details matter even in weed control, and we'll go from there. We're not going to be able to discuss all the details, but as an instructor, that will be your homework after class. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is a couple of difficult truths. I know some of you won't want to admit to it, but weeds really want to live more than you want to kill them. And they've proven that over and over. And the second thing is that Mother Nature is the ref that makes calls that benefit the other team, not you. So these are things that we have to deal with, and even if we set up our program to be the best that it can be, somebody else called Mother Nature can screw it up for us. So obviously weeds are competitive, and if you're going to kill weeds, you need to know your enemy as best you can. And so this is where a lot of the biology and the life cycle, the growth habits of the weeds that you have in your field, you can exploit to try and get better control. How many of you remember when we could control water hemp with tillage? Some of you are old enough because I'm old enough. Water hemp is native to Illinois, but was never an issue in tilled fields, and now it's probably our #1 issue in most of the state. You know, weeds have the ability to stay dormant. We've all seen that pile out back that shows up with velvet leaf 30 years later after it's disturbed. They have a lot of aspects that they can use to make sure they keep alive. So their whole goal in their lifetime is to make sure that they reproduce seed and the next generation lives on. And obviously we have some issues with resistance. For those of you that are southeast of here, congratulations on your overachieving. You have 7 herbicide classes that water hemp is resistant to. So between that and ex-governors, we're really on some really good lists. So. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about is identifying weeds. You can't kill what you don't know what it is. And so we really need to be specific. We have water hemp, we have red root pigweed, we have Palmer amaranth, and they don't always take exactly the same control methods. So we need to make sure we identify what's in our field. Understand the life cycles. Are you trying to kill an annual weed that's in season with your crop? Are you looking at a biennial or perennial? Because depending on what life cycle your weed has, there's a different way to attack it. The emergence patterns. We have a picture here is giant ragweed. Giant ragweed emerges really early in the spring when it's cold. If you have giant ragweed and water hemp in the same field, water hemp likes to wait till it's a little bit warmer. If you have morning glory, it likes it even warmer. So you have to look at the different life cycles of the weeds that you have in your field in order to make sure that you can get them all killed. And then we also want to look at competitiveness. Water hemp is very competitive, velvet leaf not so much. So how are we going to target that and make that part of our plan also? And like I said, different weeds need different control strategies. So if you have water hemp, giant ragweed, mare's tail in the same field, you have to have multiple strategies to make sure that you have wide spectrum control. Read the label. I make my students do this in class, so hopefully they do it in the future. I tell my growers, if you're not going to read the label, call me and I'll read it out loud to you. And I mean, when I say read the label, I don't mean just the part where it gives you the rate. The manufacturers have done a lot of work to find the best environments and the best attributes to put in the tank with chemicals to make sure that you get the best performance. And there's a lot of what we call little Easter eggs that you can find out throughout the label that can help you get better performance. So again, seriously, read the label. If you don't want to read the label on the jugs, I know they're pretty tiny, cdms.net has every label, every MSDS sheet, every 2EE, and every 24C label. So you can find all of what you're looking for the products that you're looking at using on there. On the label, you're going to find the information for realistic expectations. What weeds are controlled, the weed height. I know some of us are used to killing 2 feet tall weeds. If you've been an agronomist through the 90s, farmed through the 90s, but that's not really what our expectations should be. And it also gives us some field conditions that limit herbicide performance. So you'll see little tidbits like, if it is hot and dry, then add this in the tank, or different things like that. So there's information on the label to make sure that you can enhance your weed control in several different situations. Next, we're going to talk about breaking bad habits. And the first one, you have to clean your freaking tanks. You know, just like you clean your water bottles and you clean your dishes, you need to clean the tanks, because any residue that's left can somehow hamper, or it's going to affect what you put in next. And so the University of Arkansas has a brochure out that tells you the most common herbicides and how you're supposed to clean them. And so you can clean them with ammonia solution, with bleach solution, detergent, petroleum products, non-ionic surfactants, commercial tank cleaners, and water. I know a lot of people think 3 rinses with water cleans all tanks, but it doesn't. So, and just to show you on the right-hand side here, 2,4-D, the amine takes the first rinse of water, the second one a percentage of ammonia solution, and the third one water. Accent takes 4 different rinses in different types, as does Assure 2, which Assure 2 wasn't used for quite a while, but now with grass and soybeans, it's coming back. So that one takes water, 2 shots of ammonia solution, and then water again. So there's different ways that each herbicide needs cleaned. Some of that will be on the label, but this PDF I'll put up at the end from the University of Arkansas has a lot of good information. Some of your herbicides you're going to use in general, like glyphosate, are awesome tank cleaners if you get stuck in a rainstorm and it sits in your tank for a week. But those are the things we don't want to have pulled out. So any potential residue you have in your tank can affect your crop safety, but it can also tie up with any herbicide or products you put in after that. So make sure you start with a clean tank.
How universal are the commercial tank cleaners?
I'm sorry, what?
How universal are the commercial tank cleaners?
As far as what they're made up out of?
Now, on the variety of chemistries that they're effective on.
Well, like here, the only one you can use a commercial tank cleaner on, and this one is Balance Flex.
Okay.
So A lot of these particular, and I just did this is just the top of the alphabet. Most of these require ammonia and then shots of water, and Balance Flex is the only one that has tank cleaner. So it'll depend on the specific herbicide that you're using. The next thing we want to do to avoid tank mishaps is, when we mix products together. So are these products labeled to be mixed together? Is there on the specimen label, is there a special label, like a 24C that gives states additional uses, or a 2EE that's used in special circumstances? If you're not sure how well they're going to go together, you definitely need to perform a jar test prior to the season. And with the jar test, you can pretty easily see physical incompatibility. We all know cottage cheese in the tank when we see it. But you can also have chemical incompatibility, where the spray solution looks exactly like it should, but it won't perform the correct way. So, and this is just a graphic that shows you the difference between physical incompatibility and chemical incompatibility. I mean, I'm sure you guys have all found gunk and things like that, but it's the chemical incompatibility that we can't see that we need to be concerned about. And this would be particularly a circumstance where we have antagonism with our herbicides. So anytime you use a post-grass herbicide with a broadleaf herbicide in soybeans, that's where we're looking at having some antagonism and chemical incompatibility. Mixing order matters. You can't just put it in the order that you put it on the tank or on the trailer. It's very important to make sure that you proceed in the right order so that everything goes into mixture and stays there. And so this just has you start with water-soluble packets, and then you go into dry formulations, ammonium sulfate, some of your drift retardants, your compatibility agents, antifoamers. Some of your liquid formulations, not all liquid formulations are created equal. Particularly the emulsifiable concentrates, they need to go in later. And then adjuvants, and then at the end is where we would use our micronutrients and our fertilizers. Now, I will warn you that this is for your carrier if it's water. If your carrier is a liquid fertilizer, it has different rules. So make sure that you fill the tanks with the amount of water suggested. Sometimes it's half a tank, sometimes it's 2/3. The amount of water you have in the tank will determine how well that mixture starts off. So we want to make sure that we use enough water, and we want to be careful with the temperature of our water. Early in the season, when the water is really cold and the outside air is really cold, things can gunk up a lot more than they will once it's warm out. So that's something to be careful with also. In between each component, you have to have patience and let it mix. And I know when we're out spraying, we're in a hurry, especially if we see the rain coming, but it's very important to make sure that that mixture gets mixed so that it's uniform when you apply it across the field. And then obviously, a lot of the newer products you seem to really need to agitate constantly. So that's important to note about your mixture, especially if you end up getting rained out with some stuff still in your tank. Antagonism, I already mentioned. It's not just the grass products. Glyphosate can antagonize also. Glyphosate can antagonize with hard water, so that's why we put the AMS in first. But we can also have a synergistic effect, but that synergistic effect isn't always positive. Sometimes it can harm our crop safety. Use labeled rates. I know for a long time there were a lot of labels that said prior to a Roundup application and Roundup Ready crops, you could cut the rates, the pre-rates, from half down to half to 2/3. We're over that. Those setup rates are now set up to fail based on the weeds and the competitiveness of the weeds that we have out there now. So reduced rates in the first pass are really ineffective. So I would definitely use the full rates for the products that I was using. And this is really important, is to match your soil type, your soil texture, and your organic matter to the rate. A lot of products will have a range based on coarse, medium, and fine soils, but also based on less than 1.5% organic matter or between 1.5 to 3 and over 3. So you want to use the highest rate that fits your soil type. You want to use a lower rate in sand with low organic matter to make sure that you have good crop safety. You want to use the higher rates in fine soils or high organic matter soils because some of that herbicide is going to get tied up. And you want to make sure that you have enough on to actually kill the weeds. And then some have little tidbits that say, if you have high weed densities, then add this much more product to each of your tank mixes. So you want to read the labels and look for changes in specific conditions. Is it hot and dry? Are those weeds really waxed over because they've been protecting themselves from low moisture? Things like glyphosate that are water soluble have a really hard time getting through oily wax layers of leaves and getting into the plant. And so a lot of the older glyphosate labels will tell you to add an extra quart of MIS per 100 gallons. And all that's doing is making sure more of that glyphosate gets into the plant through that cuticle that's been thickened due to the weather conditions. And then, like I said, also higher weed densities. Look for the different rates for that. But with higher densities, you also need to adjust your pressure because a lot of times there are smaller weeds underneath those bigger weeds, and we need to make sure that we can get them all. You use the correct surfactants. So surfactants are very simple, but selling surfactants is like the Wild West. They're not regulated like herbicides. You can go into your kitchen, put a couple things in a jug, slap a label on it, and sell it as a surfactant. Nobody can stop you. And so you really need to be careful. Surfactants shouldn't add a high price tag to your overall weed cost. It should be fairly simple. So on the label, it will say, use an NIS that is at least 80% effective or things like that. So just make sure that you use the correct surfactant. And then manufacturers have tested all of them to figure out which one works best. Now, they may give you more than one choice, but they do have a preference. We know that we can, with the post-grass products, we can use NIS, but we also know if we're trying to control volunteer corn, we have to use crop oil. So we do have the option, but the best option for maximizing our herbicide performance is the crop oil in that situation. There'll be and or, a lot of times it'll be use NIS or crop oil and AMS and UAN. So make sure that you use all the products that you're supposed to maximize your performance. And it's also important to make sure that whatever surfactant you're using is compatible with all the active ingredients in the tank. When we put glyphosate products in our tank, we limit our choices for adjuvants because really the only thing you can add is NIS. And that may not be the best thing for some of the other products that we put in the tank. And then the last thing on here, herbicides are not surfactants. I get a lot of, well, if you add this in, it'll make that tank mix better. There are cheaper surfactants to use than herbicides for surfactants. So if that herbicide doesn't control any of the weeds in your field, it has no business being in your tank. Now this is the one where I'll probably duck in case somebody's gonna throw something at me, but there's a lot of other types of products out there that may or may not solve an issue you have. I'm all for trying new things, but I don't think putting them in your herbicide tank mixture is the best place to do it. Particularly if your neighbors are having iffy weed control to begin with. So we want to make sure when we look at products to add, is this product solving a yield limiting factor that I have in this field? And it may solve a problem in one of your fields, but not all of your fields. And so you want to make sure that you really go field by field and pick out the best products. You know, does this product enhance your return on investment? Well, if it makes your herbicide chemically incompatible, then it's not helping your return on investment. We know that weeds harm our yield. And we know that we need to kill those weeds in order to get our best yield possible. So when you look at some of these other products, it's probably best to keep them out of your tank unless they're actually labeled for the products you're using. Everything is going to have some kind of impact. It's not like you're just adding water. So It may have a positive impact or it may have a negative impact, but it's definitely going to have some kind of impact. And you should really understand what that might be before you spray it on thousands of acres. And then obviously, if you're looking at new products, test them. Make sure you leave check strips. Use them on multiple locations. Use them on your good farms. Use them on your not so great farms. And then obviously look at them also over multiple years, because 2019 wasn't like 2020 and 2020 wasn't like 2021 or 2022. And I remember thinking back that I just couldn't wait until 2019 was over, and wow, have I been regretting that since.
Turn it back on, I guess.
Okay, so we obviously can't talk about everything, but here's some useful tips. A lot of times we make weed control decisions based on logistics, but we really need to time our applications based on the weed life cycles and how it's best to kill them. So if we have giant ragweed, we want to get those pre-applications out early, 30 days prior to planting. For something like water hemp, we want to stay within 7 days of planting. And that will give us a weed-free period later into the season when we actually have a crop in the field. If we waited to control those giant ragweeds, they would be way too big by the time we put it out there at planting to actually get them under control. We had an issue this year where there are companies now selling PPO-sensitive soybeans, and that is not something you want to find out after you already have authority on your fields. So you need to ask your providers, are these products PPO sensitive or metribuzin sensitive before you use either types of those products. So that's just something. The metribuzin labels list a whole bunch of varieties that are sensitive, but they're old varieties like Coker and things that we're not going to commercially plant at this point in time. So you want to make sure that you double check on that. Rain fastness is very important, especially with a water-soluble product like glyphosate. If you're already singing "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head," it's too late to stop. You should have stopped an hour to 4 hours ago. So make sure that if there's rain in the forecast, you know how much time you have before you need to stop to make sure that those are still effective. Because herbicides are expensive. They figured out how much you would pay for glyphosate, so they're not going to discount it at any time soon. So you want to make sure that if you're going to use them, they're actually going to work in your favor. I have on here, understand the herbicide resistance mechanism. If you've heard, excuse me. If you've heard Dr. Hager from the University of Illinois speak about metribuzin lately, he has some interesting aspects about how we can use a higher labeled rate and overcome or exploit the herbicide resistance mechanism that the water hemp is showing. So he goes into depth on the CropFlix video that you can watch online. If you just Google Dr. Hager and metribuzin, it'll come up. But he did a lot of studies where he showed, he looked at the metribuzin rates from like 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and 10 to 16, which are all labeled rates, and showed that the lower rates, which are in most of our pre-products, kind of the 4 to 5, didn't stay in the plant long enough before it metabolized it and spit it out. The rates he showed, he said 10 ounces was the highest rate that was useful. 16 ounces didn't do any better. So at the 10 ounce rate, it actually stayed in the plant long enough to kill it. So maybe not an appropriate analogy, but if you drink a beer, you're fine within the hour. If you drink a fifth in that same amount of time, you're not getting up. So that's kind of what you're looking at. You're overcoming its ability to metabolize it fast enough in order to kill itself. And so I encourage you to look at that and maybe look at bumping up some of your metribuzin rates if you have the right pH and organic matter within your fields. And then also, don't assume that the name brand and generic have the same labels. This is particularly true if you're using 2,4-D prior to planting. Some of them have 7 days prior to planting, some of them have 14, but the generic labels are not always identical to the brand names. So make sure when you do read the label, you read the label of the product that you're spraying. With herbicide resistance, I think the hardest thing for us to come to terms with is we're not going to be able to overcome herbicide resistance with more herbicides. We're gonna have to think outside the jug. So if the only way that we can kill the weeds is to take the actual herbicide jug and set it on top of the weeds, you know, we need to rethink what we're doing. So there's a lot of non-chemical controls. And I almost yelled at Brad for stealing some of my thunder with the cover crops and weed control, but I let it go. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But there's different cultural practices you can use. You know, how many of you are in 30-inch beans? How many of you are in 15? So those of you that are in 15, are you noticing better weed control? Dr. Ja from Iowa State is showing that is helping our residuals stay in the soil longer and give us some longer term weed control. Not saying you have to do that across all your acres, but it's something to think about if you have a particularly bad field that's got away from you. Cover crops, which we've heard a lot about how cover crops can help soil health, but they can really have an effect on small-seeded broadleaf weed control. And the way that it helps is that you have to let the cover crop get tall enough so that when you kill it off or you crimp it, that it serves as a mulch layer for the rest of the season. And so it'll protect the soil moisture that will help keep any residual herbicides you have active as long as possible. But it also shades the sunlight that will hit the soil and stop the weeds from germinating. So that is a really good tool to use if you have some fields that got away, or if your neighbors had some fields that got away. I had some guys say, well, I'm just gonna do that right along the edge of where my neighbor's stuff got away. You know, that works too. You don't have to put cover crop across the whole field. Particularly for weed control, you can put it in the areas where it's just not really doing very, where you have a lot of weed density. We still have mechanical controls. I know my business partner always says he would rather throw up than cultivate. But now you have RTK. So cultivating isn't as painful as it used to be. So that's something to think about. I know a lot of cultivators have been dug out of the vines in the last few years. So that's an option that we have. The zappers are kind of fun, can help get out some frustration. They do pretty well with broadleaf weeds, not so great with grass, but unfortunately they have to be taller than the crop in order for you to use them. Flamers are another thing. They use an organic that can be used in certain circumstances, particularly if you have hooded flamers. Robotic weeders, I think, are going to be a thing coming in. I think right now, I think they said they're about 3,000 a piece, but you can run them all night long and all day long, and you don't have to have someone out there. So, and most of them are pretty stable, which is interesting. I kind of always think that they're going to just fall over and wait there and wait for someone to come pick them up. And then the other thing we want to look at is harvest weed seed control strategies. The weed seed destructors actually grind the chaff as it comes off the back of the combine, which is really great, except for the $70,000 price tag. So I hope at some point that comes down to a point where it's more feasible, but that can really help get the weed seeds out of the field. Something like velvet leaf may last for an eternity. Velvet leaf's going to come up after the apocalypse and it's still going to be here. But something like water hemp, a small seeded broadleaf, its viability is only like 4 to 5 years. So if you can get them out of your system, then you can kind of reset yourself and maybe go back to some of the other products that you've used in the past. Now the chaff lining, that's basically a cone that kind of takes all the chaff and windrows it off the back of the combine. So again, it serves as a mulch to kind of stop those weed seeds from germinating. So in a no-till type situation, that would work great. If you're going to just till it in, then you're just going to replant those weed seeds. So other things, I know people have asked about plowing. If you're going to plow for weed control, you can do it once. You can turn it over 14 inches and bury those weed seeds, but you better not turn it over 14 inches again and bring them right back up. So it's not the best option, but it could have some use in specific situations. So But there are, herbicides aren't always the answer, so. And then obviously if all else fails, ho, ho, ho. But I live in Goodfield, which we have a group called, well, it's a company, I believe, called the Central Illinois Bean Walkers. And it's a whole bunch of 10 to 18-year-olds that walk beans every day in the summer. They actually like it because they hang out with their friends when they do it. And so there's a lot of actual hand weeding going on just west of here in Woodford County. So in North Dakota, they call the cold hard steel, they call it the Group 99 herbicides. So that's still an option too. I had a student that we were talking about weed control, and he's like, his grandpa, if he sees a weed, he stops in the middle of the road, walks out into the field, and gets it. Doesn't matter if he's late for whatever he's supposed to be at, he does it. And I was like, well, apparently he wants to kill the weeds more than they want to live, so I have to give him credit. These are the two extension bulletins that I showed some graphics from. The tank cleanout recommendations for common herbicides is from the University of Arkansas. And Avoiding Tank Mixing Errors, a guide to applying the principles of compatibility and mixing sequence from Purdue. I had another question from the gentleman that is on the radio asking about how long can I use a herbicide if I've had it in my shed, because I know there's a lot of people using some Linearon and other things that may have been in the shed for a while. Purdue actually has another extension bulletin about how long has it been on the shelf and is it still useful. If you have it stored in a place where it doesn't freeze and thaw, it's more likely to last longer than the actual manufacturer date. But if you look at it and you see any separation or any crystals or cottage cheese, then it's probably not, it's not going to be something that you want to spray. So that was all I had. If you guys have questions.